Ani, welcome everybody. Welcome to our Robinson Huron Waawiindaamaagewin Treaty Week event. So tonight we are so excited and so happy to have our first evening armchair session. If anybody was with us last night, they know they did see us having a little bit of challenges, but hopefully we got all those kinks worked out tonight, and we're happy to present to you a double header with two of our historians and our specialists and our mentors who we worked so closely with. So we're very honored to have them here with us tonight. But I definitely wanted to give a shout out to our technical team in the background here, to Nikki Reckle, who's been doing all of our connections for us, and to Matt Lachance, who's been making sure our websites are updated and who created that beautiful Facebook frame for all of us. So I hope you guys are downloading it and sharing. So I'm gonna get ready to introduce our speakers. But I first wanted to just let you guys know that we do have our treaty transcript available on our website for download. So I encourage you guys to all check that out. It's in the original treaty transcript, as well as in Anishinaabe Governance, and it also has our understanding of the treaty. We also have our treaty history calendar that is also available for download on our website, so I encourage you to check that out. Tomorrow we're having a great event that we're targeting to our schools and our students, so come join us for our treaty talks with our future leaders. That will be happening, and we're going to be launching our brand new kids activity book. So that'll be available for download on our website, hopefully by tomorrow, and we encourage all our schools and educators to check it out. So momentarily we are going to switch to one of our first guests. We're going to have Heidi Bohaker join us first. And she'll share with us some of her knowledge, and then after that we will introduce Alan. So I hope you guys enjoy our session tonight. Please feel to ask any questions, or if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Can they message them in the chat perhaps? If you have any questions, feel free to chat them up, and we'll get to those in the end.
Ani, everyone. I hope this is working. The technology here is working tonight. It's can you see me, Nikki? Okay. I'm just double checking to make sure. It's Heidi here, making sure that Nikki, can you see the presentation? Okay. Okay. Are we good?
You're good, Heidi. You're live.
All right.
You're ready to present. So
All
go
right.
for it.
Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight from the comfort of your various living rooms. I'm sitting in downtown Toronto on Treaty 13 lands, which, as you all know, have been home to Indigenous peoples for millennia. And I'm so grateful to be here to work on these lands and to work at the University of Toronto, which is also on Treaty 13 Mississauga Anishinaabe territory. So I'm a settler scholar, and I was actually born on Williams Treaty lands in Oshawa, Ontario. And I'm really excited to be speaking to you tonight about this new book of mine that's coming out, Doodem and Council Fire, Anishinaabe Governance Through Alliance. And it's coming out through the Osgood Society for Legal History, which means, and I'm really happy about this, that 1,000 lawyers and judges who are members of the Osgood Legal Society will be, as their members' choice this year, receiving this book. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity, because what this book is doing, along with the work of other noted scholars like John Boros, who's been an incredible Anishinaabe legal scholar, is really starting to change the conversation about treaty law in Canada, and really beginning to make Canadians, and particularly the legal system, but more broadly Canadians in general, really aware of the broad tradition and the deep tradition of Indigenous legal traditions, Indigenous legal orders. And so this book is about Anishinaabe history, but it's also very much about Anishinaabe law of treaties. And it is an argument in my book. I'm making the argument that Anishinaabe peoples had a self-government system that allowed them to be responsible for the lands and territories of their local areas, but also to participate in governance decisions through alliances over a very broad geographic area, and that through these alliance networks, which begin with the family, and through the assembled community, through people's Doodem identities, through to a much broader connections spanning the Great Lakes region. So how did I get started in this work? And you can see the image on the screen is actually the cover of the book, which shows some of the Doodem images that appear on treaty documents. And when I started to do this research, which was almost 20 years ago now, it's hard to think about that, I was initially looking at history of a local history, really, of the Mississaugas after the 7 Years' War, a much smaller history. And I was asked by my supervisor to really get a sense of like who the Anishinaabe were, who the Mississaugas specifically were as a people. And so I turned to treaty documents, and when I began to do that work, I noticed, and it's impossible not to notice, all these images on treaty documents. And the more I looked, the more I realized they were on not just treaties signed with the Crown, but on letters and petitions. In fact, they were everywhere. And then I had a very fortunate encounter with Darlene Johnston, who's now a law professor at the University of British Columbia, and we began working together in 2000. Which again, yes, this is a surprisingly long time ago, and with similar sets of questions about what these images meant and why they were on all of these treaty documents. Curiously, the Robinson Huron and Robinson Superior treaties are really a handful, a very small set of documents signed by Anishinaabe leaders that don't have Doodem images on them. But that doesn't mean that, of course, Anishinaabe people in the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory didn't have a Doodem identity. Speaking to this audience, I'm fairly certain that the concept of Doodem is well known. Doodem is really a unique Anishinaabe category of kinship, and I consciously use Doodem instead of clan because it gets people thinking about Scottish clans, and that's not what Doodem is. And it has, of course, at its root, Ode, which also connects to the word fire and the word heart. And it's a kinship category that creates and continues to create a sense of kinship between people who share the same identity, regardless of where they were from throughout the Great Lakes region. And people kept this identity when they married. And so that meant that any couple was really a mini alliance, a micro alliance of two Doodem identities coming together. And in the colonial archives and the records I've been searching through, which include the writings of the Jesuits and French colonial officials, French interpreters, and as well as British sources, they're all clear that in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, Anishinaabe peoples kept their Doodem identities when they married, and use these their spouses' family ties as well to connect throughout the Great Lakes region. So they could draw on support not just of their own Doodem kin, but also their spouses' Doodem kin as well. In the records that I found in the genealogy work on treaty documents, and I know Alan Corbiere, who's here with me tonight, has also done some of this research. The Doodem identity typically, but not always, typically came through the father's line, but there were always needs to accommodate differences. So when an Anishinaabe person married a non-Anishinaabe person, it was really still important for that any children of that relationship with a non-Anishinaabe father to have that Doodem in order to really participate fully in Anishinaabe life. So, and as I talk about this in the book, there were all kinds of different ways in which Doodem identities could be bestowed through naming ceremonies, ceremonies of adoption, and different practices across the broader Great Lakes region. So when we're looking at these treaty documents, and this is a really an incredible place to begin to investigate this work, we begin to see Anishinaabe law and governance practices right on these treaty documents. And when we think of these treaty documents, and these are the documents that so often end up being litigated with the Crown around specific claims for unfulfilled treaty obligations. And I got ahead of myself there, but these the presence of these Doodem images on documents that were created in council speaks volumes about their centrality to the core principles of Anishinaabe governance. And you really can see here then government to government. Now, this image is actually the signature page of a treaty that was signed in 1701 at Montreal. And this treaty brought together 38 different nations to Montreal who gathered together to negotiate a peace treaty with the French. Now, this version that we're looking at here is a clerk's copy, but in the center of the page, the top of the second page here, are multiple Anishinaabe Doodem, including the Mississaugas from the Mississauga First Nation today, Robinson Huron signatory treaty community. And although this is the earliest written document with Doodem images on it, there are records of Doodem images being inscribed on treaty documents earlier. The documents themselves are no longer existing, but there is this evidence of this earlier practice. So the point is that whenever Anishinaabe people met in council with the Crown, whether it was in the 19th century or whether it was the very beginning of the 18th century, like in 1701 here, and they were talking about alliance relationships, they put their Doodem images on those documents. So when we look at the treaty documents, so we think about treaties, I should say, for all of Canada, and this is the map that shows in the bottom of the map here, shows treaties in Southern Ontario. You can see the Robinson Huron and Superior treaties here. These are all the treaties currently recognized by the federal government of Canada, including the pink ones, which are the new ones that were negotiated after 1973. But all of these treaties that are recognized by the Canadian government today are in effect agreements that are about signing over title. These are land sale agreements, right? So these documents are about securing the title for the settler state. But we know that when Anishinaabe people and other Indigenous nations throughout North America entered into treaty relationships with European newcomers, they were not entering into simple one-time title transactions. And so what explains this? Well, there are multiple legal traditions here at work. And so we have the French and the British with the particular perspectives or objectives about what they are going to achieve through entering into treaty. And so that might be in 1701, a peace and friendship or an alliance treaty, military alliance treaties, and land surrender agreements as all separate, discrete entities. And then we have principles from Anishinaabe and other Indigenous legal traditions about alliance as relationship, as building relationships of interdependent allies in which each ally would meet the needs of the other. And some of you, many of you, I suspect, in the audience listening tonight are familiar not only with the significance of the Royal Proclamation on the left, but also, and most particularly, the fact that the Royal Proclamation of 1763 which only laid out how lands should be purchased, was not in fact the treaty, and that the treaty between Anishinaabe and other Great Lakes nations was the Treaty of Niagara that was entered into in 1764. And I know Alan's done so much incredible work on that, as well as John Borrows in his initial study of the Treaty of Niagara. And so we know now that that is sort of with the basis of the alliance relationship with the Crown that then facilitated these treaties. And of course, as I'm sure I hope is familiar to the audience, and certainly Alan's work here is groundbreaking, and the work he's done on the significance of these medals and these other gifts that were exchanged at these treaty councils, promoting a spirit and intent of the equality of the relationship, the smoking of the sacred pipe to begin the ceremonies. This medal in particular from 1764 on the left shows the pipe. This is a pipe on the right that appears in my book that was given to courtesy of Wakwemkong, unceded territory, that was used to open the 1836 council at Manitowoc. So this is the site. These treaty councils were sites where Anishinaabe law of alliance was actually entered into, and where, as I show in the book, through the exchange of gifts, first the French and later the British accepted, under the principles of Anishinaabe law, the idea that they were now in an alliance relationship. Okay, so we'll, and I was going to say also that these Doodem images on these treaty documents, you can find them not just on the Canadian side of the border in the Canadian treaties, but also on US treaties up until 1817 with Ottawa, Chippewa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes peoples, also signed with Doodem images. And they also show up, importantly, on council documents. So they show up in any document that was the product of a negotiation in council. And so we can see here on the left, which is an 1848 petition from Nipissing First Nation, asking for title to lands around Nipissing, for gardening, for agriculture. The middle is a request from Walpole Island in 1843 that some of their band funds be used to purchase agricultural implements. And on the right is a document from Rice Lake from 1834. That's a receipt for, sorry, 1824. It's a receipt for an annuity payment for Rice Lake, showing Captain Potash, what they're saying there is Gima Potash with his crane Doodem. So one of the other fundamental principles that I was able to discuss in greater detail in the book is the way in which Doodem images always had in the top position. So the Gima always signs in the top position on these treaty documents of the column of names. And that over time, documents from particular council fires, so the one on the left here, St. Joseph's Island surrender, you see the crane Doodem in the top position. At the document on the right is at the 1805 session for the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we have the Eagle Doodem in the top position. So when you look at documents over time from the same council fire, that is the same community where there was a body that met regularly in council, you see the same Doodem image for that particular council. And indeed, in 1840, when Peter Jones recorded the minutes of a major regional council that was being held at the Credit River. It was recounting a peace agreement that was entered into between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee in the late 17th century. The language of Doodem was used to describe fires that were being rekindled or fires that were being newly established. So the connection here then between this land surrender document and the composition of the signatories on the treaty document gives us a snapshot or look at what was the composition of the local council in that particular community at that particular time. Now, the Robinson Huron and Robertson Superior treaties were actually signed with regional councils of allied council fires, that is for much larger polities. But most of the Upper Canadian treaties were actually signed with what Peter Jones, the Mississauga Anishinaabe missionary, described as a common council, the local council that was responsible for land matters. And those common councils are the first, what we think of as the First Nations to the reserve communities today and across the province of Ontario and in through the United States where the tribal councils are. Some communities today aren't in their original locations because of relocation due to settler colonialism and settler colonial dispossession, but many are, including the Robinson Huron Treaty communities. Demonstrating that tremendous continuity with place and that tremendous continuity with government. Okay, so this is, for example, an example where I was able to look at the different treaty documents that were signed, for example, at the Credit River, because there was just so many more sessions in Southern Ontario, so it made that treaty, that process that much easier. And from 1764 through to 1844, the subsequent Gimas are continue to be Eagle Doodem all the way through. Even though the local composition of the council might change, that particular Doodem was the keeper of the council fire of that community. And indeed, when we go back to that 1840 treaty recitation that Peter Jones recorded at the Credit River in January of 1840, that same language about the founding of the Credit River Council Fire as the placing of a bald eagle at the Credit River, at the mouth of the Credit River, and the placing of a caribou at the narrows between Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching, where Minjikaning or Chippewas of Rama First Nation are today, or a whitefish on Manitoulin Island. And so this use of Doodem as a metaphor for the local governments as well, for the local common councils, is a key part of how this kinship tradition was also really integral to the broader system of Anishinaabe governance that entered into treaties, not just in alliance relationships, not just with other Anishinaabe council fires, but with other Indigenous confederacies like the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, like the Lakota and Dakota in the Western Great Lakes, and also, of course, with Europeans, all through the same laws of alliance that were internal to Anishinaabe society as well. And so, I was really struck when I was reading Basil Johnson, his Ojibwe Heritage. He says that the totem was probably the most important social unit, taking precedence over the tribe, the community, and the immediate family. So again, Johnson, so many years later, in writing in the 1970s, is foregrounding the centrality and the importance of the Doodem to Anishinaabe life. And here is this quote from Peter Jones explaining the distinctions between what he calls the common councils, which today are as I said, are many of the First Nations, and the broader general councils, and that common councils are places where local affairs are settled, such as the sale and division of the lands. So the common councils having local responsibilities for the lands, dispute resolution, adopting other Indians, he said, adopting other Indians into their own body, so citizenship law, and the transaction of business with the British government. Each person is at liberty to give his opinion on all matters before the council. So there's some really amazing insights here into Anishinaabe governance practices and law here, in that citizenship law was the responsibility of the local council, the Common Council, and what, today is the responsibility of the federal government of Canada, external affairs, that actually was the responsibility of each local Common Council, which is Peter Jones also says in his chapter on governance in his history, was autonomous. That is, each Common Council was free to make its own decisions about which other council fires it would enter into alliance with. So in this way, we can think of the complex world of the Great Lakes politics was that political life and social life were the alliances that were formed between these common councils. And then common councils that had entered into alliances would meet regularly at general councils. And just the same way, you have the North Shore Treaty Councils for the Robinson Huron Treaty. Similar kinds of general councils or regional and gatherings were held on a regular basis of allied council fires. And at these councils, Jones noted, federal unions are formed, war and peace is declared, treaties are made or renewed, and the boundaries of territories are established. So this is really important, that boundaries between Common Council territories were negotiated. Another aspect of sort of the general or regional councils governance that one can see in the historic record all the way back into 17th century accounts is the way in which those annual gatherings of those allied council fires at general councils was also a place to ratify new leadership. So if you think, so even though local common councils were determining their own citizenship and they were entering into their own external affairs, when they elected their local leadership, when they said this is going to be our new Gima, this is going to be our new council, the general council would ratify it. And so this is also really, really significant, because it really speaks to sort of fundamental Anishinaabe values about consensus and consultation between allied peoples. That if you are in an alliance relationship, you have to consult on all these matters with each other. So you see this happening, and I'm going to actually give a detailed description of one gathering that happened in 1641 to set the stage, sort of how this was operating. Now, when I originally started to study these general councils, or sorry, these common councils on all these land sale agreements, I noticed that, going down too fast, sorry, I noticed that you would see, for example, as the document on the right is the composition of a council of Bawating, and you see 4 cranes on this document, 1 martin, a pike, and a thunderbird. And then you also see on the strip in the middle, which is a treaty signed with the Chippewas of Rama at Minjikane, that a reindeer, the Gima is a reindeer, the Anike Ogima is the otter, then you have a pike and 2 more reindeer. And so when I was looking at this and then studying and thinking through sort of the kinds of conversations that happen today about the different roles that Doodem contribute to Anishinaabe society, that cranes and hawks and loons are likely to be in positions of leadership, that you see bear, Noka, and Maingan, and Bijou lynx in defense. You have also other beings, other Doodem beings involved in sustenance, food gathering, in learning, and in medicine. You see all these roles, and then I would look at the Common Council and say, well, that as represented on the treaty, and say, well, they're missing some, and I couldn't understand or initially reconcile the difference between these two until I started thinking about where the women were. And of course, all Anishinaabe peoples historically married outside their Doodem, which meant that every marriage was bringing together these people from having 2 different Doodemic. And indeed, some of the marriage records I was able to piece together from research involving Southern Ontario Anishinaabe who converted to Methodism. Fortunately, Peter Jones and other early Anishinaabe Methodists like John Sunday kept baptismal and marriage records, so this was a fortunate place to find women, and also recorded people's Doodem identities. Could see that practice that was described in the 17th century was actually continuing to be practiced in the 19th century. That is, people were marrying outside their Doodem, and that if you consider the council as comprising the entire community, a community would have representation from all those different Doodemic throughout their community. You would have people who could look at sustenance, look after medicine, look after leadership, because the women were part of this too. And indeed, Anishinaabe historian Carrie Miller has written a really great book called Okima, which is about Anishinaabe leadership. And she has, in her chapter on governance, talks specifically about the work she's done uncovering the role of women's councils in the 19th century, and that women played an important political role in all of these councils, and in fact were a discrete body advising the Common Council on common decisions. And indeed, she also talked about and found evidence through oral histories of warriors' councils as well. So what was really exciting for me was to discover that there are 3 treaties signed between the British Crown and the Anishinaabe in the early 19th century that are the signatories are listed as the chiefs, the warriors, and the principal women. And I think these treaty preambles are actually referring to these core structures of Anishinaabe governance. And indeed, the document that's up here on the screen, just to give you an example, shows, this is the only one I have with women on it, women's Doodem images. I'm so excited by this document. It's actually the 1784 treaty, which gave the British Crown sort of permission to resettle the 6 nations on the Grand River territory. So it was the treaty that was signed by the Mississauga Anishinaabe before the Haldeman Grant of 1784. The version I have here is a clerk's copy. So they didn't do as good a job copying the Doodem images, and this is unfortunately a real problem of these old documents in the pre-photocopier era. When papers got damaged, clerks made true or certified copies, and then they would like burn or throw out the original because it was all, grungy and not good. So we don't know where this original document is, but this is the one we've got. And the middle Doodem image there, Wapamanese Chikwa, she is actually most likely Wabakamakat's wife, and he was the principal Gima at Credit River, but she was from Lake Huron, and likely related to Wasson, the Crane chief. So she's Crane, and I think this again starts to show the significance of these connections between council fires that were maintained through these Doodem kin ties, because women were typically marrying into other council fires. So they were marrying out of the communities that they were born into. And then typically after the birth of the first child, moving to the community of their spouse, but being very active in governance and bringing in with them the knowledge of their home communities, as well as their Doodem knowledge that they would have had, and bringing that together to contribute to their new council fire. So if you think of it, like, I think these women were like essentially external affairs, and they were responsible for keeping these networks of alliances together. Okay, so I'm going to show you quickly now also some of the ways in which these Doodem images communicate other aspects of Anishinaabe law and understandings of territory, and the ways in which they really bring to life that deep knowledge of place. So just here are some Crane images from different treaty documents. They really are active images. They really show, for example, the Crane images show these animals, these beautiful birds, going through various postures. We've got a crane, Potash's crane is jumping, Tokwish's crane is in the location call posture. Sometimes the Doodem images were track marks, and it really makes sense. It has a beautiful logic when you think of kinship with these Doodem beings. And you can see also the heron. I got a heron track in the mud here. Just how clear the images are. Both minimal, they convey just the core information, and they're precise as to which Doodem people are. This is a caribou Doodem, and here you can see over and over again that the signatories used, particularly emphasized the hoof, because of course the caribou has the roundest, widest hoof of any member of the deer family. And sometimes you can see this also on the track mark, how people definitively indicated the dew claws, which of course would leave a track particularly visible in snow. Here we can see otter and marten Doodem, and again, the signatories emphasize the ear to make the distinction between them clear. And catfish Doodem, they're two different types, and distinguished by whether the tail was forked or squared off. And there are many other. In fact, I have found over 108 different. Sorry, that shaking sound in the background is my dog. He's just gone to presumably find somebody else at home to let him out. And so these so I said I found over 108, some very specific to local places. So there's a pelican Doodem, for example, in Lake of the Woods. Birch Doodem seems to be only, I've only found examples of in Eastern Ontario. So again, some real geographical variety. And some that may have come in from intermarriage with other communities. So thinking then through about the ways in which this system made it possible for Anishinaabe peoples to move broadly and widely through this territory, and made it possible for people to find relatives wherever they went. It also was core, essential to their economy, is how this Doodem tradition, why this Doodem tradition, I think, was so central to everything about Anishinaabe political and social and cultural life. So I'm just going to speak very briefly about a gathering that happened in 1642, and it was in September. And this was a gathering of your ancestors. This was a gathering that happened about halfway up Georgian Bay on the east side. May have happened at Perry Island. And it was you could just tell from the description, it's the earliest description in the colonial records that I've been able to find. It's in the Jesuit Relations. And it really describes a happy time. It describes people coming together. The Jesuits who were witnesses said there was nothing but joys and cries and public acclamations, to which the rocks surrounding the Great Lake returns an echo that drowns all their voices. So people came from council fires all the way from southern Georgian Bay, from actually Wendat were also there as invited guests. Nipissing was the host nation, and there was folks that were there from Bawating. So this wonderful gathering, and people have packed their canoes full of gifts, and even just the arrival, when you read about the description of the arrival, it's a grand entry, and the canoes are lined up, and people came in by their nation, and they stood in their canoes, and they were welcomed into the host territory, and there were gifts given right at the beginning in the gift exchange. In fact, some of them were described like a mat wrought as tapestries are in France, beaver skins, hatchets, dishes, porcelain beads, or wampum. And some of the images I'm going to show here are actually from museum collections overseas that have Anishinaabe material culture in them. These are from trips that Alan has been on with me as well, and other colleagues to these museums to see these beautiful material work. Very large mats, all kinds of beautiful items. So the Jesuits are describing this tremendous gift exchange. People were given moccasins. That's a wampum string up in the left-hand corner. And that then it was, in addition to the grand entry, then there was the political work that began, that all the nations, he said, so he's saying there, all the council fires come together, each in their own seats, that all these beautiful skins of different animals were exhibited, and that each Gima present gave gifts to those who held the feast, and each gift was named, giving each present some name that seemed best suited to it. At these councils, the Jesuits, the various meetings that were held during this multi-day gathering, the Nipissing also ratified their leadership. So this is the earliest example in the historical record of this kind of ratification ceremony where all the council fires recognized the new and approved the new Nipissing leaders, and then the new leaders gave gifts to everyone assembled. There was another more somber occasion that occurred, or event that occurred at this ceremony, and that was the return of bones, bringing people back to their home, to the country in which they were born. And this also makes a real deep sense within the logic of the Doodem tradition that many of these remains would have been of women who had married out and their remains were being returned home, and they were returned to their families, born between the presents given to the most intimate of friends, and were accompanied by the most precious robes and by collars of porcelain that are the gold and the pearls and the diamonds of this country. And there was also at these ceremonies games, feasts, and the Jesuits estimated about 50,000 French livres worth of goods exchanged hands. Then from that event, people dispersed and they went back to their homes. But then Bawating hosted a council fire, hosted a regional gathering just 2 months later. So you can imagine the ways in which these kinds of gatherings serve not only as sort of the broader Anishinaabe economy of gift exchange, but also ensured that the news and political conversations were being spread throughout the region through these kinship connections. And so I also argue in the book that this is sort of this is the way in which French and then your British were entered into, and this is the spirit of these treaty relationships, so that the relationships that governed Anishinaabe treaty law between council fires, between Anishinaabe council fires, also govern the relationships between Anishinaabe and French and English. And in fact, because the British in particular, but also the French before them, participated in this regular practice of gift exchange, that they understood and accepted these principles of Anishinaabe law. And in fact, you can see these are some interesting portraits here. The two on the left are actually, well, the first is Sir John Caldwell, who served in the Great Lakes region during the 7 Years' War. And that's clothing, including the headdresses, Allen's work has so crucially pointed out, would have, it's not something he could have bought. That would have been gifted to him in recognition for his role as a post commander. Likewise, the regalia given to Andrew Foster, which was gifted to him while he was serving likely at Michilimackinac. Look, he's got a Thunderbird totem on that neck ornament. And you can see, just for comparison, the Managoching from Bawating wearing his crane totem, and the photograph is actually of Shingwak, as you've probably all seen this photo before, but it's a nice one to come back to Shingwak, Nabanagoching, and William Robinson, all in regalia. This, I think, puts a really critical context around the spirit and intent of both Anishinaabe and British, in particular, acceptance of treaty relationships, because they too were participating in these present exchanges, and through the gifting of medals, the British and earlier the French were doing the same thing that the regional council was doing in 1642. They were recognizing the leaders, so that this was part of the law of treaty. I'm going to wind up here with this painting that was actually one of the exhibits I introduced in the treaty trial. It's a painting, canoe race near Sault Ste. Marine. It was done in 1836 by an American artist named George Catlin. And I just think it's a wonderful place to end because it shows the kinds of games and festivities at that could have happened at any of the gatherings that I describe in the book. And it also shows a lot of the joy and the happiness and the way of life and the law and the society and the culture that people were endeavoring to protect when they entered into treaty with newcomers. So I'm going to end there, and hopefully folks will have some questions and we'll have a good discussion. Thanks so much, miigwech.
Okay. Ani, miigwech, Heidi. That was great. Always love listening to Heidi, and so happy that she was able to be here to share with us today. So we are recording the event, so this will be available for viewing after our event is over. Do we have any questions coming in for the chat for Heidi, or are we going to wait till the end?
We don't have any right now.
Okay. So we don't see any questions coming in from the chat just yet, but if you have any, please feel free to post them up. And we're just going to get ready for Alan. So Alan, if you're out there, just let us know when you're ready to go. If you could turn on your mic and your camera, and then we'll get ready to send you live. So we're very happy to have Alan Corbiere here with us tonight as well. Work very closely with Alan. So happy to have him here, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge both Heidi and Alan as expert witnesses on our litigation. So as you know, we're going through a court case with our annuities case. So, they were very integral to that process as well. So we want to give them a shout out and say miigwech. So with that, I think I will pass it over to Alan. Are we ready for Alan?
Okay, now. Ninso jik mampim chiging donjaba chiging jinka de manda shkunagan nidomanising te manda shkunagan. The reserve I'm from is called Michiging, and it's on Manitoulin Island. I am called a fisher in Ojibwe, and it's Mabo Ojik Wesi Awit Kainin Pagi Okensi. It doesn't mean that I'm going around fishing or angling. Fisher is an animal. I happy to get invited to do this presentation. I'll try and go through this fast because I put too much slides, which I usually do. But I wanted to talk, it's supposed to be about the covenant chain to Robinson Huron Treaty, 1850. But I'm actually wanted to talk about this in the sense of the importance of symbols and the use of symbols. And I'll focus on the symbols, a little bit on the wampum belt, not so much, but I want to actually focus more on these medals. So this top one is called the covenant chain, that wampum belt you see up top. And it's got what we would say are 5 links of the chain, the silver covenant chain. And it's 2 men in the middle holding hands in alliance. And that's the Anishinaabe and the Jaganash holding hands. And they note that they're both equal. Not one isn't over the other. So like when you go to these parks in any big city usually, but mostly Toronto and Ottawa, you'll see oftentimes one of their so-called great explorers pointing the way west, and then you'll see an Anishinaabe kneeling, pointing the way by their feet. So the symbolism actually on the statues is that we are subjugated to the great explorers, to the non-native, or as they say, Eshkibagam Kijik, the newcomers, the new settlers. Shagana Shakmino Wemtagojike on Mike, Noch go Enswayanagazawat, Gondak Wafkiajik. Any of the people that are what we would call light-skinned, Germans, French, British, all people from Europe that came here. So usually we're the ones that are showing the way, but when we're showing the way, we're depicted on these statues as being below. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that actually when this treaty started out, these treaties started out, we were on equal footing. And then the one below that on the lower end of the slide is called the 24 Nations Belt. And I know many of you have heard me talk about this, but that one is what we call the Eternal Promises Belt. So the British had said that they would always supply us and give us warmth, what they called warmth. And warmth came in the form of blankets, cloth, as well as ammunition, guns, net thread, canvas, as well as shkudeabo, something to warm your insides, the fire water, so-called fire water. So there are 24 nations there standing, holding hands, but they are bound by the strong cord of friendship, they would say. And that strong cord of friendship was affixed to that rock. Some say the rock at Quebec, and that's at the left end of the belt, but others say that's all of North America. And to the right of the belt is a ship that's coming from England. And they said they promised us that we would never sink into poverty and that ship would always be full of anything that we needed and all that we needed for our livelihood. So that's what they promised us in 1764. Actually, they promised it in 1761, and then that didn't work out mainly because of General Amherst. And then Pontiac, Odawa Chief Pontiac, as well as Seneca Chief Gayasota, stood up and asserted themselves and made it known that they had not been conquered and that the British were to give us presents annually. And so this was done annually. So here, this is Sir William Johnson, and it's this is actually taken from his report on what they call the Congress at Niagara. When we went to court in November 2017, this became a big issue, just the word, because we call it the Treaty at Niagara, and the government of Canada and Ontario dispute that it's a treaty. So they would say it's actually listed as the Congress at Niagara in Sir William Johnson's papers, and that's true. It actually does say a Congress at Niagara. Anyway, but prior to that, in March, Sir William Johnson wrote to his superior, General Gage, but also to the Lords of Trade, and stated that he thought it would be more economical to conquer our prejudices, as he said, and jealousies, if we were to actually enter into a treaty of an offensive and defensive alliance. And he stated that they, meaning the Native people, would hardly need our assistance. They pride themselves on being fighters, but we would be able to draw upon their assistance if we ever needed them in a war. So that's what this he was proposing, that he would be given the permission to actually enter into a treaty of offensive and defensive alliance. And that's what this Silver Covenant chain is the basis of. So here he said this in July of 1764 at Niagara to the Western Confederacy. I'll specify specifically that's who he said this to. You have now been here for several days, during which time we have frequently met to renew and strengthen our engagements, and you have made so many promises of your friendship and attachment to the English that there now only remains for us to exchange the great belt of the covenant chain, that we may not forget our mutual engagements. This is the important part when they talk about mutual engagements, because now, of course, when we were taken to court, they wanted this to be called a Congress, and also not a treaty. And then they also wanted to say there's no signed document of this Treaty of Niagara, and nor are there any clauses in this treaty. There's just mutual engagements. So that's the present Canadian government and the present Ontario government's way of saying that, or trying to diminish this as a treaty, the standing of this wampum belt as a treaty. But to us, this is a treaty. The Anishinaabe always viewed this as a treaty. This is a painting that was done after the fact. It's of Johnson Hall, which is on the south shore of Lake Ontario, and it's done after the fact. So it's but apparently the fellow who did the painting, now his name escapes me, but his he had witnessed a gathering such as this before. Anyway, this is how they would have gathered around the council fire, and they would have, you see there's a desk there where the scribe is taking down the minutes and the speeches, and then you see on different sides there are different chiefs and their warriors and their spokesmen. In Ojibwe we would say Gigido and Ninok, and Gigido and Ninok is counselors, but they literally mean speaking man. And then also we say Mijinoe, and the Mijinoe, Peter Jones translated that as aide de camp, but it's also translated as the messenger, chief's messenger, and also some would say it's the what do they call it? A steward, the steward. Anyway, these are the different functions that the speakers would have. So there would be an orator could be called Natawet. That's an older word that you don't really hear too often now. And then also the Nata Gigada, the one who, the good speaker. And then also Ogema Gigada. So the Ogema Gigada, for each of these councils, it was a temporary position, but that means chief speaker. So the chief speaker actually was selected amongst the chiefs, basically, to be the one who would represent their views in a particularly big council. So that's I've often said this when I've gone to Chiefs of Ontario meetings or the Union of Ontario gatherings, that instead of calling them like regional chief, they should actually, especially if they're Anishinaabe, they should call them that Ogema Gigada, chief speaker. So, and then realizing that is not a permanent position. It's a temporary position, and that's what it is currently at political territorial organizations. So I try to get people to actually use these terms that we had for our governance. Anke Ogema is another one, and that's the, now we say deputy chief, but that means the next chief in line who would be there as well. So these people, they all gathered here, and they were the ones that were to keep and memorize the promises that were made. So you see the chief with his young men, and that's what they would say, Ogema Minwa Odo Shkanigi Man, the chief and his young men. And then what was reported is that they often, a chief would get one of the young men to memorize the first part of the message, and then the second young man to memorize the next part, third young man the third part, so that when they got back to where they were from, they were able to recite that whole thing, the whole message, the whole proceedings, and each of them were charged with a specific part of that talk and to maintain it till they got back to tell their elders and their fellow warriors, as well as the women and the rest of the community. So that's how we did it, because back then, especially in the mid 18th and 17th century, we didn't use writing at that point in time. So this belt, the belt with the 24 nations, that actually is what they called support or warmth. And then the belt below it, that top belt, I had my late friend Emmerich Miigwes, and he was the one who made that. I got him, and his sister Lynn Miigwes assisted him. They made that in 2002, and that was when we were trying to have a gathering, an educational gathering, we'll call it, about the 1862 Manitoulin Treaty. And you know, when you try to use a word as anniversary or commemoration, then people get all mad because they say, well, you don't want to commemorate that, you don't want to honor that. And so it became kind of I said, well, we got to do something. 140 years since this happened. So we got Emmerich to make those belts. The one below that one is actually made of real wampum. The top one is replica beads from Czechoslovakia. These beads that are on the Great Covenant chain belt are actually real wampum harvested from the eastern seaboard and then made. And it's the Canadian Museum of Civilization that commissioned Ken Miracle, Mohawk from Six Nations, to make that. So anyway, Ken was up here on Manitoulin Island when he made this, and when he was on his way to Ottawa, he gave me a call and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, nothing." He says, "You got time for coffee?" And I says, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "Meet me in Little Current." So anyway, we just met at that information center, and he brought out this beautiful belt that he made from real wampum, and now that's at the Canadian Museum of History if you ever get a chance to go over there and see it. So for our part, this is, I went through the Sir William Johnson papers, and then I was able to find out that the Ojibwe chiefs that went down there, one was named Shawanagabo, and that means standing in the south. And then Kage Se, it could mean, I'm not 100% sure what this means, but usually the end is Se has to do with flying. And then it could be Kage Se, always flying. Forever flying, I guess. Zawangibi, I got no idea what that is, but Zawa, usually they use the letter O oftentimes for a long ah sound, like King Kong. When you see Kong, you think of, when you say K-O-N-G, you think Kong, long A. So this could be Zawangibe, but it's Zawangibi. Anyway, I don't know what it means. Gyotasin. So that one almost sounds like something is being blown in a circle to me. Anyway, that's what that sounds like to me. But this fellow was a Cree. And then Waba. This one looks like it says Wabagekek, and to me Wabagekek is that marsh hawk, the white hawk. I mean, Kekek is a hawk. Wabe is gray or white, so white hawk. Then the Odawa chiefs, Bindanwan. That means a quiver where you could keep your arrows. Kashkoki, I forget what that means. Takamas, what I suspect this is, but I haven't proven this conclusively, is we have a chief here on Manitoulin who actually signed the 1862 treaty, who was a Odawa chief at Wikwemkong. And then since he signed that 1862 treaty, he was forcibly removed from that reserve. He went home one day after signing the treaty, and then he found all of his stuff, his belongings, out of his house, and he was roughly transported down to the bay, and some of his stuff made it into the boat, but he himself was placed in the boat, and then the people of Wiki pushed him, gave him a good push, and said, "You want to live? You want to give away our land, and so you go live on the ceded side." So that's why he got expelled from Wikwemkong. But he was commemorated for that by being named Takama, the township. So that's what the township means. Takama is after that chief who signed the treaty. But his full name was Tekamasamo, and Tekamasamo means lightning strikes across the sky, crosses the sky, instead of going down perpendicularly or vertically, I should say, sorry. So that's what that name means, but they cut the name short. So I suspect that usually these chiefs would inherit their names from their fathers or grandfathers. And so that's what I suspect this Takamas means here, that Tekamasamo, the chief who eventually signed it, this must be his great-grandfather. The other thing that ties in there is the Odawa chief, Andrew J. Blackbird, who wrote a book on the history of the Odawa people. He had said that the premier Odawa clan was the Moose, according to him. And Takama's clan signed on the 1862 treaty was a Moose. And in other documents, it was a Moose. So we know that the Takma was a Moose Clan chief of the Odawa. Ojingwas, I'm not sure what that would be. Bemasat, that could be the Walker. And this one says Shawamose, but it could be Shawanose. And there's a chief Shawanoswe. So the English at that time weren't great at rendering Ojibwe names. And then Oche Bosh Kizagan. So I think that means the great gun or the cannon. And then later on in 1850, there actually is another Kchibosh Kizagan chief named that. So that name gets carried a number of different times. And then in 1764, Giogushkam, and apparently that means pushing the clouds back. Egomene, that means corn hanger, or Negomene, it's sometimes spelt as. Niswakwut, the crutch of a tree. They were all Odawa chiefs from Michilimackinac. So this is the two belts that we understand that the chiefs kept saying that they received from their father, Sir William Johnson, at Niagara. One of the interesting things during the court case was that Alan Bolio said that he suspects that 24 Nations belt wasn't given at that time. He said there's no evidence in the written record that belt was delivered. And it's true in the sense that there is no explicit mention that he says then gave the belt to 24 Nations. So William Johnson doesn't write that, nor does he say gave a belt of eternal presence or any such belt, but there are so many belts that were given at that time. Sometimes it just says gave a belt. So on the one hand, it doesn't explicitly state that belt was given at that time, but also there were, I forget, a friend of mine there, Rick Hill, the Seneca fella, counted how many belts were actually exchanged according to the Sir William Johnson records at that time, and it was up to 100 and something. Anyway, it was a lot. So here, this is on July 17th with the sachems and chiefs of the Odawas, Chippewas of Toronto, of Lake Ontario, Lake Superior, and Nipissings, Algonquins, Menominees, and Odawas of La Baie, the Six Nations, and Indians of Canada. So he says, brethren, we reduced all of Canada and of consequence became possessed of all the outposts which the French governor granted us by the capitulation. Although we were numerous and able, we did not attempt anything against you. They often sent armies against you, killed many of your people, and meditated a design of possessing themselves of your country. We never attempted the one nor intended the other. So here he's actually assuring all of these chiefs and those nations that they were the owners of their land, and all that was transferred was the forts in the area. So Fort Pitt, Fort Detroit, Fort Niagara, Fort Michilimackinac, and the one at Green Bay, Auguste. So all those forts were transferred as possessions of the French over to the English, but they knew at this point to actually say that the French did not own any other land, and that the French, when they lost, that they didn't defeat the Anishinaabe or the Menominee or any of the other nations. So that's the important part, is that when people talk about this wampum belt, I often try to really stress that it actually refers also to the affirmation that the British affirmed that we own this land. Now, of course, when they talk about Aboriginal title in court cases, they say that this Royal Proclamation is the Magna Carta of our rights. I tend to say that this wampum belt is our Magna Carta, and but of course, when they talked to us in council, they actually didn't use their legalese then. They actually used our diplomatic and metaphoric language at that time. So that's why we got to really research the symbolism of these speeches and these metaphors. so that we are able to understand what our chiefs were saying back then, and then also to be able to pursue that kind of line of reasoning in the current day. So here he says, brothers of the Western nations, I desire that you will take fast hold of the same, and I never let it slip. To which end I desire that after you have shown this belt to all nations, you will fix one end of it with the Chippewas at St. Mary's, whilst the other end remains at my house. Gave medals to the chiefs. Niagara, 31st July 1764. So this belt was actually going to be kept or entrusted to the Ojibwe at Sault Ste. Marie at Bawating. But they didn't list the name. They said Beja Ogema Ginani Bwe. One of the chiefs, Ojibwe Ogema, one of the Ojibwe chiefs stood up, Gibazigwi, and then he says, this belt should not be kept at Sault Ste. Marie, it should be kept at Michilimackinac, a place of more consequence and a place where we gather more. So that's how this belt actually ended up getting entrusted to the Odawa people, the elder brothers of the Three Fires, at Michilimackinac. So that was one way that this was how the Odawa ended up with this belt on behalf of all the Western Confederacy. So in Ojibwe, the medal is called Kinwachchigan, and that actually just means a sign sometimes. And then you also say Kinwachchige if you're walking in the bush and then you're blazing a trail. You just nick the bark or you break a branch as you're going along. So it's called a mark as well. So here on July 31st, he gave the medals to the chiefs and exhorted them to look at them often in order to remind them of their engagements. And again, remember, that's the word Sir William Johnson used for this relationship was engagement. He didn't actually say this is part of the clause of the Treaty of Niagara. And we got to bear in mind when we go to court against the Canadian government or the provincial government that they'll say this was a Congress. And at that Congress, you entered into mutual engagements. You didn't enter into a treaty with clauses. So these are just different ways that people use the language. Then Blank rose and spoke to Sir William. Brother, we thought of what you have said and greatly approve of the same. We are determined to follow your advice for the good of our people, and we shall never swerve from our engagements, but look at the medals you have given us every morning. So again, when he talks about the morning, and oftentimes in later speeches, the chiefs will say, I looked at this, I looked to the east and I saw my father's face. And that meant basically that they were looking at the medal. And then the medal, of course, is a reminder of their relationship with the King of England, with the crown. So that's what this actually means. And this image on the side is actually Sir William Johnson's chief certificate. And you see there on the tree of life is a chain, and suspended on that chain is a heart, a silver heart. And this became a symbol of the alliance as well. So, and then of course also that fire, and Heidi talked about that council fire, the importance of that council fire. So this medal actually, the medals actually become really important later on to the Anishinaabe. But what ends up happening, of course, many of you know, these peace medals were highly coveted by collectors, and then collectors, of course, bought them. Sometimes relentlessly pursued the chiefs to sell them, and then other times they got put into hawk. And then when they went to go pay to get them back, they said, "No, I bought this," and they said, "No, I put this down as on loan." So that apparently is, I was told that's what happened here on the island, that some of the chiefs here still had these medals, but they went a little current and they put them in hawk, and they said, I'll come back and pay you what I owe, and then I'll get my medal back. Anyway, they never took the medal back, were able to get the medal back. So anyway, these are what I want to show you is how the chiefs actually looked at these medals as part of the treaty. Here are 5 medals, and these are at the Royal Ontario Museum. And they actually had a system. They said you give the big medals to the big chiefs, and then the middle size medals to a lower status chief, and then the small medals to a councillor. So anyway, this one in the middle here, right in the middle, is actually one that was given after Pontiac's War to those that were allied with the British during that time. And on that image is a lion reposing and a wolf that is barking, and almost cowardly so. But basically that's what they said that this image means, is that this is given in commemoration of the time and they used this similar wording, but derogatory wording about Pontiac, when that mangy dog Pontiac tried to rile up the noble lion, meaning the king, and Great Britain. So that's what these medals are, and you see the chief's visage on the opposite side and his coat of arms on the other. The thing when I talk about clans, usually I talk about the time I asked my dad about our clan, and I wasn't expecting him to know, but he knew. I asked him Wanesh Gododemana, and he Gin Kwatak Bine Ko Gikadok. They used to say Bine, he said to me, and I was just floored. I was really surprised. So then I asked my mom, and she didn't know. But there was my great aunt was still alive then, my mom's aunt. So we went to visit her in Jishiguaning on Manitoulin here. And so I asked her, I got my mom to ask her what's her Doodem. And so she says, when I was young, she says, I had found a crayfish, and that's my granddad's name, my mom's maiden name, Shage she, but now they just say Shage. Anyway, that old lady was living with her grandmother. She was raised by her grandmother. So she says, oh, that's Shage's Doodem, Shage she. And she goes, oh, because that's her that was my aunt's half brother. So she says, oh, that must be my Doodem too. And then she says, then the old lady, the old lady then said, Kae Gododem, see, this isn't your Doodem. Mishibji Gododem. Jaganash Kos. Your father was a British man, she said, and your Doodem is that lion. Anyway, when you look at these medals, you'll see that lion on there, and that's how the Anishinaabe looked at this as being a representation of their clan, their Doodem. And then on the other side is their father, the King of England. Anyway, these medals became very symbolic. So here's, I pulled together these words that were in older dictionaries about the medal. Kakinwachchigan, and that's the one that I talked about, but it means a medal, also a mark. Because after the War of 1812, the chiefs would get up in council at Drummond Island, and they would say, Father, I beg you for a mark. My father was a chief, and he had been given a mark by our father, but he has since lost it. I would be really pleased if you were to give me a mark, and that mark would shine upon my breast. So they would talk about it like that, and at first I didn't really know what they meant by. I knew they meant medal by a mark, but I didn't know that the Ojibwe word was literally meant a mark. So the next word on this chart is Kinwachchige. He marks or makes marks. Okay, and then Kinwachchian, he marks him or he marks it. So this is what they call a transitive verb. So And then Kinwach Ja'a, that's the same word, just spelled differently. This is what we call what I call the French-inspired orthography. The above words were the English-inspired orthography, or the Anglican, I should say. I mark him, I put a mark on a person or any other object. Also, I tell or indicate to him a mark or marks. I circumcise him. And that, of course, you could take that any other way as well in this context later on. But at that time, I don't think they meant it that way, being circumcised. Anyway, Kinwach Je, I am marked, I am circumcised, and that's from the Baraga dictionary. And then he also lists Kinwach Chigan, a mark, a sign, a miracle, the sight or aim on a gun. So Kinwach Jo'un or Kinwach Jo'in, a banner, a flag, any mark, and this is also then a medal. So again, the other part is Napkawagan. We now know that word for a scarf or a tie, but here any object that is worn on or around the neck handkerchief, string of glass beads or pearls, a little cross or medal. So in some people did call this medal Napkawagan or Napkawagan. And then a lady from Perial in Wasauksing, Alice King, was recorded by linguists, and she told a story that I'll actually in a future slide relate. But she called it Jonya, meaning silver, because it was silver, or money. And then others called it Biwak Kons, wire, can, or metal. But I think that Biwak Kons, this is getting a bit off track, but I think that Biwak Kons was written by not the chiefs. It was written by an interpreter who taught metal versus metal. Anyway, so the council fires are places where presents were delivered and where the children, supposed children of the Great Father, the King of England, or the Great Mother, Queen of England, gathered for their warmth. And this was at Michilimackinac for our area, 1764 to 1798. And then at St. Joseph's Island, 1798 to 1812. And then during the War of 1812, the Americans burnt it. And also the Michilimackinac, the presents were delivered 1812 to 1815, because the Confederated nations, along with the British, took Fort Michilimackinac during the War of 1812. Then after 1812, the Council Fire was moved to Drummond Island, and the presents were delivered there from 1816 to 1828. But in 1828, the Drummond Island, the survey was done after the War of 1812 finally, and Drummond Island became American property. So the British garrison had to remove themselves from there. And so for 1 year, they delivered the presents again at St. Joseph's Island. And then they went to Penetanguishene and delivered the presents from 1830 to 1835. And then the Council Fire was ignited at Nidawaniing on Manitoulin, and the presents were delivered from 1836 to 1854. Anyway, during this time, the earlier time, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Menominee, Sauk, Fox, Ho-Chunk, and Sioux would come to Michilimackinac, St. Joseph's, Drummond Island for the presents. But when it was when the presents were delivered at Penetang, they want to make that trip. People, the Sauk, Fox, Ho-Chunk, and Sioux, that was just too far for them to travel. And but when it got established in Manitowoc, some Menominee did come out as well. So the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Menominee gathered at Manitowoc to receive those presents in those years. This is the type of presents that were given by the British to the chiefs, and you see in 1822, I should have showed an earlier sample, but it's basically kind of the same. But right before wars, of course, these lists of presents are more extravagant and in greater quantity. And then you see in 1854, the presents are cut right down. So there's butcher knives, tobacco, gunpowder, flints, needles, combs, threads, blankets, shrouds, gray cotton, ratteen, molten, caddies, and blue cloth. That's 1854. In 1822, you got cloth, molten, ratteen, striped cotton, all kinds of blankets, silk handkerchiefs, laced hats, plain hats, sewing needles, sewing threads, gartering, binding, vermilion, combs, awls, fire steels, butcher knives, hunter's pipes, tobacco, ball, gunpowder, gun flints, gun shot, and gun worms. So the important part to keep in mind here too is they gave us tobacco. And you all know, well, maybe you don't all know, but I don't know who I'm speaking to in this computer. But anyway, the majority Anishinaabe, and I don't know if there's any other non-native people listening, but tobacco is a sacred plant to us, a sacred medicine. And whenever we had any important dealings, we smoked the pipe and we smoked tobacco. And then whenever we actually asked anything of the spirit, we offer that tobacco. And then whenever somebody asks an elder or medicine man anything, they give them a gift of tobacco. So to me, it's really significant that the British were giving us tobacco each time we delivered, we gathered for presents. The other thing I want to mention here too, remember I had said earlier that 1764 wampum belt represented the Magna Carta, but it also represented their recognition of our Aboriginal title and our ownership and proprietorship of the land. But here, if you notice, they're actually giving us gunpowder, gun flints, gun worms, ball, and shot. They're actually affirming our right, Aboriginal right to hunt and fish, because they're giving us, throughout time, they also gave us fish hooks. And they actually even, down at York, they even had their blacksmith make a contraption to hold a pine knot where we could go spear fishing at night. And they also, of course, outfitted us with iron spears to do that. So here's the extra articles that were given. So chief guns, common guns, rifles. Common guns were the lowest grade, chief's guns were better, and rifles were the most accurate. They gave us brass kettles, tin kettles, fishing hooks, cod lines, net thread, Russia or Scotch sheeting, and this Scotch sheeting is actually what like a canvas. So we used that, the Anishinaabe used that to, when they had their canoes, they would stick up a mast and they would put that canvas up, and then they wouldn't have to paddle if they had a wind. So it was a sail, and then they also used that, of course, for cover our wigwams. Anyway, the important part again is that this wampum belt represents that land, but also represents hunting and fishing. That's the other part I want to emphasize to you, because they're giving us these means each time, and when they're giving this giving us tobacco around the fire, and we've all smoked that peace pipe, the sacred peace pipe, and we've all touched that pipe, and then they're giving us tobacco and net thread and guns in that. They are actually giving us, affirming our right to hunt and fish. And they did that from 1764 to 1854. And then, of course, that's when things started changing. And that's when they started starting to make this Indian Act, formulate the beginnings of this Indian Act. Here, this is 1812, January 1813. A fellow fur trader named Robert Dixon was commissioned to take this belt and try and get all the Anishinaabe to be allied with the British to fight against the Americans. My children, remember Sir William Johnson, he told you I never would forsake or abandon you. I have not, nor will I lose hold of the belt which has been so long among you. On the contrary, I will now make it stronger by the belt which I now present to you. And never will I leave you, but as your father, see that justice is done to you by the big knives, and that your hunting grounds are preserved for your use. So that's what they were selling us at the time to get involved with the War of 1812 was to fight for our land, keep it out of American hands. And again, they used this wampum belt and they referred back to the 1764 Treaty of Niagara and the Covenant Chain. Again, he makes it stronger, he says. He doesn't replace that belt, he adds it to make it stronger. Here, this is what Tecumseh's dream was, as well as his brother Tenskwatawa, the prophet. And they wanted this to be an Indian country, a buffer zone, the British called it, to stop or quell or halt American expansionism. So this was what the dream, and imagine if we won the war, this could have been all an separate Indian country. That's what Tecumseh and them were fighting for. So Dixon says they must be told in a voice of thunder that the object of the war is to secure the Indian nations the boundaries of their territories, and that all those who may be found within their boundaries shall perish if they do not immediately remove. So again, it's this idea that they're using that wampum belt and referring to the land. This is here where they start to get talking diplomatically and metaphorically. This is a chief in 1817, and he goes down to York. He takes the belts with him, and he goes to York in July of 1817, and his name is Nanamdabit, the one who is sitting for a prolonged period of time. And you see, actually there was a chief named Nanamdabe, who was a Odawa chief, and he actually signed that 1836 treaty, and beside his Doodem, although that Doodem looks like a kind of a Barney sideways, the pen got away on him. It's just a big blotch, but written beside it in pencil, it says eagle. And I know in other documents that Nanamdabe signs with an eagle clan. So he says, Father, our ancestor met our father, the English, for the first time at Niagara, where they kindled their fire. Here the whole nation was assembled and were a whole day in council. All our affairs were satisfactorily arranged, and ever since we have been satisfied with your conduct toward us. When kindling a fire means you're taking up a residence. So when they said they kindled a fire there, it either means you're taking up a residence or establishing a fort. So that's what he's referring to, the establishment of the Fort Niagara. Father, at the rising of the council, our ancestors planted a tree, saying that thenceforward it would remove all obscurity from our eyes. And Sir William Johnson told them never to lose sight of it, nor suffer anyone to break a branch from it, and should attempts be made then to collect ourselves and protect it. Here he delivered 8 strings of white wampum. Again, this tree, you could talk about this tree of life for a lot longer time, but that's what he's referring to. But he's also referring to the flagpole. But when he refers to the not to lose sight of it, you'll see that it's supposed to be a reminder, that Union Jack flying up high. Father, after the fort was retaken, our ancestors went to Montreal and gave up to Sir William Johnson the prisoners. He's referring to Michilimackinac, who told them that they had conducted themselves well. He showed them a vessel, telling them that it was loaded with presents, would be so yearly, and which would be delivered to us, that his breast would always have wherewith to make them merry, and we now hope to receive what will enliven us on our return to our village. Delivered 8 strings of white wampum. Again, here he's talking about the vessel, but that's the Napquan, the ship, and that it would be loaded with presents. Again, he's referring to that, what we now refer to as the 24 Nations belt, or the Eternal Presence belt. And here the metaphor, this metaphor is used other times as well, that his breast would always have wherewith to make them merry. So here he's referring to rum. And in another speech, a different chief says to the commanding officer, he says, open up your coat and put your breasts together, and let our father put his breasts together, so that we may have a drink of his milk. When they're referring to milk and their breast, they're actually referring to rum. So that's what he's asking for here. Our warriors desired me to inquire why the doors are shut on us, and why our father's breast at Drummond Island has ceased to flow as formerly. So they had cut back on the amount of rum that they were dishing out at Drummond Island. So he actually asked them to give them more rum. These are the 3 belts that were brought out after the War of 1812, and the Odawa chief named Okeda, whose I believe whose descendants live at Shishiwaning, Ontario. His name is spelled different ways, and is a Bear Clan on petition. The Odawas, Chippewas, and Winnebago Indians assembled at Drummond Island and requested to hold a council. There were 350 men seated with Lieutenant Colonel McKay. The chiefs ate the camp, laying down a broad wampum belt made in 1764, one made in 1786, and one marked Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDougall, commanding at Mackinac, with the pipe of peace worked on it. So these 3 belts were made by the late Emmerich Miwas, my friend, and his sister Lynn, and their mother Lynn Miwas, Linda. Anyway, there's this belt is the covenant chain. The middle belt had to be repledged, and it says SR, and it looks like it's IIBT, but the Latin form of writing a J is a I, so that's Sir John Johnson Baronet. So that's Sir William's son. He had to repledge the covenant chain after the American Revolution, when the British ceded that land without our permission. Here's Okeda, and he refers to this belt, but the scribe didn't actually say that belt was, the 24 Nations belt was actually there. He just listed those top 3 belts. Anyway, he says, Father, my heart now fails me. I can hardly speak. Those bad spirits, the Americans, take possession of our lands without consulting us. Father, our chiefs did not consent to have our lands given up to the Americans, but you did it, my father, without ever consulting us. This is one of the speeches that if any of you are teachers, you should actually teach your students. This is one of the classic ones that we should all learn. Here, this is Chief Jaguacons. He was painted by Cornelius Krieghoff, a great Canadiana artist, when they went to Montreal. But here he's, this is a speech from when he was at St. Joseph's Island in 1829. Holding a few strings of wampum in his hand, he said, Father, the great master of life gave us pipes and wampum for the purpose of conveying our ideas from man to man. I return thanks to the Great Spirit that made me, and to my great father, the king, who supports me. What he promised to our forefathers, he continues to perform. He is charitable to the Redskins. So this is one of my favorite quotes of his, when he says, the great master of life gave us pipes and wampum for the purpose of conveying our ideas from man to man. So that's our, what we're trying to restore is this this practice of interpreting these belts, these wampum, as well as these pipes, and that's important to understanding our treaty relationship. And again, Jaguacons, he actually had quite a bit of people that would help him, the priests and traders. He would convince them to write his petitions, and he would sign those petitions. One was signed with a, looked like a crane there, but on this bottom one it says Jichishquin, plover. And a Jichishquin in our language, I understand it to be the killdeer, which is related to that plover. So he says there in this petition 1835, Father, my father, those houses you see along the beach and the dwellers therein were never allowed by me or by my fathers to have built or to clear the little land they have. My father, our place is becoming like a meadow, for they have destroyed all the good timber about the place. I held a council with them last fall, telling them that they must pay attention to what I say, but they do not. They will not pay attention to me. So here he's saying that that's his land. Well, not his personally, but his band's land, and that they should actually receive or be asked permission to when they're being denuded, when the resources are being extracted. So this was prior to the 1850 treaty. So the following year, 1836 happens. Bondhead comes up to Manitoulin, and he actually just wants to get rid of Indians, really, and he wants to. He thinks he thinks in his words, the Indians are going to melt away like the snow in a spring sun. So he thinks that, and the kindest thing we can do is to isolate them and let them live their last days on their own. So he was a romantic writer, what they would call romantic, not as in Harlequin romance, but romantic notions of the noble savage. So Jean-Baptiste Signac basically pulled these wampum belts out and recited them. And this really appealed to Bondhead's sensibilities as a travel writer and what they call a romance writer. And so he, right there on the spot, he said, well, let's make a treaty. So the first, what a Signac had said at that time, actually this quote comes from a statement written in 1851 after they heard that the presents were going to be discontinued. But I just put it here because the Signac did recite the belts in 1836. So anyway, there's a bit of playing with the dates here. Somebody usually comes up to me after and corrects me, says that wasn't this, or anyway. So he says, "My children, I clothe your land. You see that wampum before me, the body of my words. In this, the spirit of my words shall remain. It shall never be removed. The Indians being my adopted children, their life shall never sink in poverty." So of course now you see how many of our people are impoverished and have been impoverished, and many of us have lived through in our lifetime where we had no running water either, and there's a lot of people still have that boil water advisories. They don't get clean water, and they have poor housing. Anyway, the first lines of that treaty that Bondhead had struck, and this was in the handwriting of Thomas Gummersall Anderson, Indian agent, who actually fought during the War of 1812 alongside the Anishinaabe, and who could actually speak Ojibwe as well, and who led a commission in 1848 and 1849 to find out who were the chiefs and proprietors of the North Shore of Lake Huron. So he says, 70 snow seasons have now passed away since we met in council at the Crooked Place, Niagara, at which time and place your great father, the king, and the Indians of North America tied their hands together by the wampum of friendship. As far as I know, this is the only treaty that refers to the Treaty of Niagara. And then actually what also, the actual treaty that's at the National Archives of Canada, it is said that there was a string of wampum that was affixed to it, but now that string of wampum is gone when it was entered into the archives. So there's a string of wampum that's missing. Anyway, in 2011, we had the 175th anniversary of this, and we held a gathering at Mantuaning when I worked at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. And we borrowed the actual treaty, and we had it on display at the OCF. And but what Bondhead writes is he left a copy of that treaty with one of the chiefs, so we don't know where that duplicate copy is. And recently, the Bondhead family, the descendants of the Bondhead family, had a number of items in his estate that they were going to auction off, and one of them was this Calumet pipe. So here, this is a type of pipe that was, there were two chiefs on Manitoulin, well, two men on Manitoulin, one was a chief, that were documented as making these type of pipes where they had the bowl had a head. And one was named Abenweshkam. And this Abenweshkam, it looks like he ended up living at Mantuaning for a little while, but then he might be the same fella who takes the name John Riley, and then he subsequently moves down to now where we call Deshkan Zibing, or Chippewa the Thames. The other fella was called Pognaket, and that just means the pipe maker. But it was Bebomset, who was Shawan Oswest's son. He was also known to make these kinds of pipes. So the pipe stem of this is actually at least 2 feet long. So these are calumet stems, not the pipe stems that we now know, and it's wrapped with quills. You see at the end. Anyway, I don't know where this pipe actually is right now, but I know that it was being repatriated, and I believe the people of Wikwamkong were making the claim on it. But who's to know whether or not it was the Whitefish River people, Bebamset, who made this, Bebamse who made this, or if it was Abenweshkam who made it. So this is the Bondhead Treaty, and you see Jean-Baptiste Signac. He could write his name, so he signed his own name. And then here, this is Bondhead's name. And then here, this says Gimewan. And it looks like it's a Buffalo clan, but actually in pencil, it's written in Anderson's handwriting, Bear. So we know that it's Bear clan. And then here, this says Mukmanish, and he signed with an X. And you heard Heidi talk about this, how some people, the chiefs, used an X instead of their Doodem. And what the late Fred Pine had said was that why they used an X was that it wasn't a closed deal, that it was open, that they were supposed to add on to it, meaning that escalator clause of the annuity. Well, why Mokmanish signs with an X, I wrote an article in the Anishinaabe proceedings, conference proceedings that are at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. I did quite a bit of research on Mokmanish. Anyway, what I suspect is at this point in time, he's actually living at Larber Cross or Cross Village in Michigan. And they just signed the treaty in February of that year, and then it went to Senate, and then the Senate unilaterally inserted a removal clause that after 5 years the Odawa would be removed from the upper state of Michigan. So they were actually trying to secure their homeland, either in the Michigan or here. So that's why I think he signed with an X. He didn't want to give anything away, as far as I can tell. But that's subject to more research. So again, this was referred to, and the chiefs had written in Ojibwe in 1862, and they referred to this in 1862. They had heard that in June of 1862 that commissioners were going to come to Manitoulin and that they were going to ask for another treaty, and they didn't want the treaty, especially the Wikwemkong chiefs, the Odawa chiefs. So they had a gathering at Michiging, present-day Michiging, June 27, and they brought the belts out, and that's when they wrote this out of what this belt means. They wrote it out in Ojibwe. And one of the lines that are written in there, near the end of that petition, it says, Meanwhile, dash echo nishna eshin gudwaswe, echo the subobonagot. Meanwhile, ngibe disagona kche ogema, ngibe zongtamagana, mampi in the minismina, ja apaje de bendamang, ninwe Anishinaabe Wayang. And he says, and again, we were told 26 years ago, so this is 1862, and they're referring to the 1836 treaty. And we were met by the Chigama, meaning Bondhead, the lieutenant governor at the time. And he told us, and I like this word, the way they say this, Ngibe Zong Tamagana. Zong ze means he is strong. Zongun is something is strong. So he says, we were told in very strong terms that we own this land. We are to hold on to this, own this island, the Minissimina. Those of us that are Anishinaabe, that's what they said. So again, this is a reference again back to that 1764 Treaty of Niagara. Here are some paintings and sketches of some of the signatory chiefs. Jean-Baptiste Signac and his son Erewishkosh, who also signed that treaty, and he could write his own name. And then that the handsome fellow on the bottom left is with the awesome hairdo is Shawan Oswe. And then beside him is Bemasage, also known as Esbanish or the raccoon. And then the one smoking the little pipe is Gimewan. And then beside him, with the even wilder hair, is Mokmanish, who was given a sword after the War of 1812, and who had a medal as well as a gorget and a coat with epaulettes. So these are the chiefs that signed in 1836, and you see their dodems, and then also where they are from. So it has Pipi Gwen clan, that means a sparrowhawk. Wasi, that's a brown bullhead. And again, Pipi Gwen Makwa, that's a bear. Mos, that's moose. Mazandamo, that's a black water snake. Fork stick, Megeze, fork stick. Ejijak, that's a crane, sandhill crane. Ginoje, that's a pike. It says, by shouting out his name, it says in pencil pike, but I know the current chief of Whitefish River says that it's a sturgeon. And then beside Espanol's name, it looks like it says lark, but I think it says cock, meaning rooster. And again, this goes back to the idea that and this is documented elsewhere, that the people who had French fathers, the symbol of for French people was that rooster. And this has to do with Christianity and the Gauls, and the spelling of darkness and the hearkening of daylight, meaning, of course, Christ and Christianity and all that. And then snake, it says squirrel beside his name. And of course, nobody wants to say that they're Jidmo Dodem, but anyway, everyone wants to be a bear, eagle, or wolf. So there should be a bunch of squirrel clan on the North Shore. And then the Megazé, Dodem at the Mississauga, and then a Dik, that means caribou, and a Mick, that's the beaver at the French River. So in 1837, Bondhead was supposed to come back up to Manitoulin, and he had a special flag made, and it had the Union Jack, and it had the crown, and then under the crown was a beaver representing the red man, as he said, and the lion representing the British. So when we had this gathering in 2011 to commemorate that, we had these flags made. But Crystal Miwans, who was working with me at the time, and we didn't like this flag. We thought we should remake it. And I've been still trying to make it happen, but I guess it ain't gonna happen. Anyway, this is the flag that Crystal and I designed. I said inside, you see, it's a circle, of course, and the Thunderbird on top, and the Meshibiji on the underwater. So it's the upper world and the lower world. And then in the east you have the lion, and then in the west you have the eagle. The eagle and the lion meeting each other. And then it's, of course, 4 directions in there, but also you see we put in there those 4 quadrants. So if you actually look, it actually looks like the Union Jack within there as well. So anyway, we were trying to use that as a symbol of alliance with the British, something that didn't actually put Native people under the crown. Because when you have them under the crown, to me, that means we think of ourselves as subjects, and we don't. This is another speech that I think should be in the schools. And it's Xinghua Kons, is 1838. Father, I will speak the sentiments of the Chippewa, Odawa, and Potawatomi. Father, you once made a great fire at the island of St. Joseph, where you planted a tree such as you have planted here, and from which you have just now taken down your flag. Again, remember earlier I mentioned the Namdabe had talked about that tree. And then also on Sir William Johnson's certificate was that tree. Father, the tree was very tall and it could be seen from a great distance. Father, you have taken away the flagstaff and the flag under which your children were accustomed to recline and take shelter. Father, when you laid your log, you said it would never burn out, but that the smoke from it would always be seen at a great distance. You told my ancestors to bring their children and warm their hearts at the fire of this log. But when I came past it to this place, I could not discern the spot where the tree had stood. I cleared the place and made it clean around the log, and all our young children have agreed to turn the log and see whether they can find a dry place where a fire may be kindled. Here he's talking about he left Garden River and he went by St. Joseph's Island and he's coming to Manitowoc. So he's actually wanting the British to actually establish St. Joseph's Island as the Council Fire again. That's what the purpose of this speech is. Father, the three tribes wish you to pull up the flagstaff which you have planted at this place and erect it on the island of St. Joseph where it originally stood. Father, the three tribes have come here to obtain fire from our great Father with which to rekindle the log that smoke may rise from it as formerly, for it was not burned out. You promised that three generations should pass away, and yet we should find the fire burning at this log. What's interesting here is that he says 3 generations, but now we say 7. Anyway, Father, many of your children live a great distance from the island. And there is a high hill between which prevents their seeing the fire which burns or the flag which floats from the staff erected at this place. Father, many of your children have not seen yet seen. They are very poor. They have but little game left to subsist on, and the traders are becoming very stingy. They sell their goods at a very high price. So that very high hill, he's actually referring to Fort Brady on the American side of Sault Ste. Marie, and that whenever they passed by there, the Americans always kind of gave them a hard time, especially the Menominee or any other of the Americans. And remember, this is actually at the time of the Upper Canada rebellions, and it was a very tense time. The following year, again, they had a council at Manitowoc. Anyway, Chingwa Kons obviously lost his bid to have the Council Fire moved to St. Joseph's Island. The Anna Jameson, who wrote a book called Winter Studies and Summer Rambles, she came up to Manitoulin and she met these chiefs and she heard that speech, and then she said one of the Odawa chiefs got up and made a case for it, that flag and the fire to remain at Manitowoc. It was either Adawish or Mokmanish. Anyway, Waawiindaamaagewin, chief at French River. Father, you advised me to abandon the mode of life of the Indian and to seek the consolation of religion and the comforts of a civilized life. I have followed your advice and I'm well. No firewater now touches my lips. You have recommended to us leave off our habits and mode of life and settle all together and cultivate the land. Father, we were willing, but to do it we must have tools, and we ask them from you. Father, ask our great Father in Toronto to give us some axes and hoes, merely all we require. Also nets. I ask also for our women that they may fish while we are tilling the land. Note here again this the change in gender roles that was being proposed. So there's Waawiindaamaagewin and his signature on the 1836 treaty, and it says Beaver Clan. And then this is Chief Bem Goneshkung, who was the chief at Magnetawan, but then moved to Chiging in 1847 and signed the 1850 treaty. But here he signed the 1836, and it says reindeer. Doodem and Father, the people from Penetanguishene all come here to take from the waters the fish which are mine. I do not wish to prevent them and thus impoverish them more, but I think it right that I should receive some slight remuneration. Father, our great mother, extend the goodness to all her children. She cannot see any difference. May I then beg that one of my relations married to a Frenchman may receive presents as well as myself and the tribe. So there's 2 things here why I brought this up, is again the idea that they were giving them nets, but also that he specifically stated that he thought the fish were his, and that if the people of Penetang were taking his fish, that he should receive some kind of remuneration, him and his band. And then also that when the women were marrying Frenchmen, which actually was an alliance to assist them, in the fur trade, and it was a strategic move. They lost. They were ineligible to get presents. So he was actually saying we need them to keep getting presents. Anyway, this is of course now bore itself out in the Indian Act years later. Here, Xinghua Kong says, Father, you will at once discover that the land which we here occupy is not as it should be. The young men who now surround you, although half-breeds, belong to me. My blood runs through their veins, and they have one and all given themselves up to me, and now form part of my tribe. It is my determination to serve them to the best of my ability. So he actually, Xinghua Kong actually wanted the Métis as his relations to be involved in this treaty as well. And of course, the government ruled that out, and they were also ruled out of receiving the presents. So we have a bit more work to do, because it seems to me that we really, there's a lot of division. And we talk about this, not only reconciliation with the non-native people, but I think we have to have this reconciliation amongst our own people, especially in regards to people being mixed blood who were disenfranchised. Here's that medal. And this is Alice King. She told a story in 1976. Mio japi io weshki yamagak io treaty mio de ga deje yamagak o de bautegong. Mi dashpi gi jabigeat gawino ya gikshkito sinui jabiang io danozwin. Mishko et gi aj de akabigeat. Mi dashpi gi mindwa neo jonyan kchigamakwe dash. Ma gi mzinaza. Minwa jonya gi minawak. Minwa gi minawak pagawayan goding de bishkak. Mish ensa apto bon. Mi gi mindwa io jonya. Enso ngopo bonagak. Gi minawak io pagawayan. Mish go et goding gi mindwa neo jonyan kshigamakwe zinazat. Gi aan genio au nemishomis. Gi na andash. Mima na pi gamatsek io treaty ganja mindwa neo jonyan. A long time ago, when the treaty was new, the place where it was at Sault Ste. Marie. When they signed the treaty, nobody could write his name, so they only signed with a cross or an X. And when they were given those medals with Queen Victoria's picture, they were also given money and one bolt of cloth. Then every 6 months they were given that money, and every year they were given that cloth. But they were given those medals with the picture of the Queen only once. As for me, my grandfather had one, but he lost it. That was the time when the treaty started. That's why they were given those medals. Oops. What did I do? Nikki.
You can minimize the black screen. Just go to minimize in the top right
Okay.
there. And now you have to start your show from current slide.
There?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the medal that was struck for Queen Victoria in 1840. And you see at the bottom, if you can see that, it says 1840, and then there's Queen Victoria. So this would have been the medal that would have been given if Alice King's story is to verify Alice King's version. I haven't seen in anything I've read that the chiefs received a medal at 1850, but this would be the medal. This is her, the medal with her visage. The one to the left on this one, it was actually reissued in 1860 when the Prince of Wales came. And the picture is bad, it's kind of pixelated. Here, if you can see my cursor on this, there's 3 ostrich feathers. Oh, what happened there? And those 3 ostrich feathers are the symbol of the Prince of Wales. So that's how we would know the difference. But the chiefs were given this, a delegation of chiefs went down to Sarnia in 1860. And that was a significant meeting as well. But anyway, so this medal, the chiefs were also given at that time. So if they were given this one medal, it would have, for according to Alice King, it would have been this one at 1850 because it wasn't struck. It was struck in 1840, and they had a bunch of these. But then in 1860, this was purposely struck for the Prince of Wales visit, and that's why that it has that additional mark of those 3 ostrich feathers. Anyway, I'm glad you're still awake, Nikki. Here, this is how important these medals are. In 1877, Chief Deboske of Chiging went to Mantuaning, and he said that he thought that his whole band should receive the annuities. And he said that he feels ashamed as the father of his children cannot provide for all of his children, that some of his children are excluded. So like how the chiefs and councils would refer to the great father, the king, as their great father, the band, each band referred to their chief as father as well, and the chief referred to his band as children. But Chief Wakagijik, the Chief Deboske asked Chief Wakagijik to come to this meeting. So Chief Wakagijik said about Oga, he was a great chief of the Ojibways and best understood the Indian laws. There was a great meeting at Niagara Falls at which time the medal now produced was given to the chief, and in brackets it said the medal bore the date 1764. Of 24 nations of Indians as an emblem of authority, the man who held this medal was a great and good man. This medal here, this is the medal, it says happy while united, and you see there it has the symbol again of the Anishinaabe sitting beside the Jaganash under the tree that I mentioned numerous times, and smoking a pipe. And then also the clasp of this medal is a calumet stem. That's an eagle wing, and that's a pipe that's affixed to it. Oga was Deboske's grandfather, and then Oga had a son named Nibalcom, and Nibalcom was the father of Deboske, and Deboske is the one who had this medal. And he said that all of his band should receive that annuity, because they weren't at that time. Then in 1879, they had a grand council at Garden River, and then they wrote a petition, all the chiefs of the North Shore and of Manitoulin, and they had stated on there, they were told by their great father, the king, that he would not always live to look after them and their rights, that after his decease, efforts might be made by evil disposed persons to deprive them of their presence. And if they were ever so unfortunate as to lose them, all they would have to do would be to present the treaty and the medal, which I give them, to my successor on the throne of England, and both the covenant and the promise would be speedily and faithfully carried out, and the presents restored to them. So that's what this medal actually is part of the treaty. That's what the chiefs are saying. But these medals, many of them have been bought and sold and are in private collections or museum collections or archival collections. But I'm also, why I wanted to do this presentation was to actually appeal to people on the North Shore to keep their medals if they have them, but also to let us know, because they actually form part of that treaty. And then the other thing is not to sell them. If you're going to sell them, then sell them to an institution like the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. So here, the bottom medal there is a medal that was actually given to Negomene back in 1764 at Niagara, and about 10 years ago it was auctioned off by a descendant, and we tried to stop the auction, but we stopped it once and then we let down our guard and we thought that we stopped the sale, but then 6 months later it went on auction and it got quietly bought. Anyway, this is a chief of Garden River Gebeose. And he wrote a manuscript, and in that manuscript he details the oral tradition as he was told. And he says, my agreement will be as good when you arise in the bright spring morning as you see the sun arising over the hills like a big fire to warm yourselves. Thus my promise will be as good as the sun, and it will last as long as it will arise and set. And I will be as your father, and I will take care of you as a father takes care of his children, his loved children. And remember that I have promised you an everlasting friendship. The envoy then took a medal and said, you see, this medal is round. It has no beginning and no end. And then taking the clasp by the hand, I take you forever to be my child. Taking the chief by the hand, sorry. So again, this is the circle representing representing eternity, that the medal represents eternity, and that these promises represent eternity. So that's what these medals are why they're so important. But also you just see how the language is very metaphoric as well as evocative, that when you arise in the spring and then you see the sun rising over the hills like a big fire. And earlier I didn't get to talk about this, but in that speech they talk about that you'll see the sun rise red like the color that I wear, meaning the red coats of the British and now the successive RCMP. And these were mnemonic devices used for the Anishinaabe, of course, who weren't at that time literate in the sense of using the alphabet. Thus my promise will be good as the sun, and it will last as long. And and then he talks about the fire as well. So it has a lot of elements in there. So this was the medal that actually, it had the certificate and everything. So it says to Chief Egawene, and then first day of August 1764. And if you remember, like the fourth slide I showed, that Sir William Johnson then delivered medals. This was that day. But here, a fellow by the name of Gabriel Sinabe actually wrote on the back of that certificate each time the medal changed hands and how it was handed down. So he says it was given by Sir William Johnson in the month of August 1st, 1764, to Negumane. Then second, it was given to A.N. Sinabe, or Asin, in 1816 at Drummond Island at the Council Fire. Bear in mind, this is done at the Council Fire as well. And then the third, it was given to John Bitasage Sinabe in 1844 on the 25th day of July at Mantuaning and Mantulan, witnessed by his grandfather, Asin, and Thomas Gummersall Anderson. Then the fourth, it was given to Gabriel Sinabe, 1893, 15th of July, Sagamok Point, by his father. So on the other side, it says, these papers and medal of George III were handed down. And then he says, carefully by my grandfather's fathers to my hands this day. I went to the Indian Department in the year 1893 with these testimonies and medal, and I asked for admission to live in this reserve, meaning Sagamok, with all our families of the great family. And therefore we were allowed to settle permanently in the Spanish Reserve Band number 2. And also the Indian Department made further promise and agreement with me at that time to receive the Robinson Treaty as according to the members of the band, and we did so, received for 4 years, and from 1897 our names were removed from the treaty list, and for 7 years we had not received the annuity. So he used that medal to actually get on the annuity list, which I find actually pretty amazing. But then at some point in 1897, they were cut off again. So again, just to reiterate how important those medals are to that whole treaty, and they serve as reminders. This is a picture of Xinghua Kong's, I think it's his last son, youngest son, John Askin. And here he's wearing the 3 medals, and I can't tell if it's that 18, one would definitely be for the War of 1812, and this little one on his breast is for the General Military Service Medal for fighting at Fort Detroit. But then the other big medal, I wonder if it actually is that Queen Victoria medal. I can't tell because it's both of them medals are actually facing the coat of arms. The coat of arms side is side up, and this is Pegamagabo. But you see the big medal that he wears. You can definitely see it's a Queen Victoria medal that he is wearing. And then this is David Miigwens, who was a councillor of Chiging at the time, and his picture was taken when there was a delegation that went to Ottawa. And this picture is at the Canadian Museum of History. Anyway, he's got a big medal, but the medal that is facing out is the coat of arms. So I can't tell if it's a King George III or if it's a Queen Victoria medal. So Pegamagabo, of course, is from Wasauksing as well. And Alice King was from Wasauksing. And you see that medal there. Maybe that's the one she's talking about. More research is required. These are the different belts that were given throughout the time. And that would be more like another 2 hours to talk about all that. So, but I'm just going to end there and show you that the top, Ken Miracle showed me this. When you look at that top 1764 medal wampum belt, you see those two diamonds at the other end. And when I first had Emmerich make this, we had a pattern that we followed. And I used to talk about this in a linear fashion, stating that why that first diamond is unfinished, it means that something was already in place there at the beginning. And then as you go through left to right, like how we read now, left to right, and then you get to the right end of the belt, you see that other chain link hexagon, and then you see that other part, and then I used to say that means it's going to go on into the future, why it was unfinished like that, meaning it's going to continue on. The belt isn't a discrete beginning and end. It actually has the way the symbols are indicates that it began before and that it's going to continue going on. Anyway, Ken Miracle was told by an elder, put those ends together and then you actually make a circle. And so that's what we did, and you see that on the bottom. And that covenant chain, again, referring back to what Gabero said about the metal, that it's a circle, just like the sun, that it has no beginning and no end, and that these promises are eternal as well. Miigwech is in the back, Kenyanchiek, Ayek, Oede, Wasmo Sabing. So thank you all for listening, or maybe it's just Nikki and Cheryl now. Anyway, you got something here for posterity, and if you have any questions, if there's a Q&A, maybe Nikki and Cheryl have a question. Yeah. This kind of feels like, well, maybe you're not old enough. When you're sitting there, you're reminding me of like a Second City TV when they would do these mock.
Love Second City.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Well, Miigwech, Alan, and Heidi, those were so great. So happy you guys could join us today or this evening. We did have some questions come through the chat. So I was thinking that I'll read the questions off, and then I'll give a chance for Heidi and Alan to respond and say any final comments, and then and then I'll close it up with some final words for our session tonight. So some of the questions that came in, there was a few of them, and I appreciate all of you guys for answering them. So one of the questions was from somebody named A. Is it possible that some of those tree clans were actually the names of people rather than their clan? So for example, Chief Shingwok drew a pine tree on documents. We had another question from Nelson Toulouse. Happy you're able to join us, Nelson. What types of ceremony took place during the treaty signing? Another question. Oh, my Bruno Henry's earrings are on here. Bruno just gave us a shout out. So miigwech, Bruno. Another question from Anonymous. The last picture that Heidi showed, is that a canoe race or what kind of activity was that? And I just had a couple more, just so that you guys can kind of respond in a way to just be more respectful of time. So another question from Nelson. What about those people with French or British fathers? I've heard of and seen what looks like to be a rooster dotem. We also had Wasa Migazes say, Ani Allen, he can hear you fine, so that's great. And then just, I believe the final one, or two more. What was governance like pre-treaty, and how did the treaty impact those systems? And finally, do you think that the items in museums on the other side of the world will ever come home, and who would take care of them? So I know we had quite a few questions there, but I know just because of time, we'll kind of give Heidi and Alan a chance to respond. And if you need me to repeat any, feel free, and they're also listed in the chat. So who wants to go first? Maybe we'll pass it over to Heidi.
Okay, so first question about the bark dotem. It really is in eastern Ontario. There's definitely a bark dotem there, and I can just quickly attempt to show if I open my share tray here. And hold on, that should work in theory. The British colonial officials, when they were, I was saying click to exit, that's wrong. Okay, I'll have to start this over, sorry guys. When colonial officials were giving out presents at annuity, for annuity payments, they would also often take a census or what was called a return in the documents, in some of the ones that Alan has shown you. And this one that I'm showing you, on the left is a return of the Chippewa Nation of Indians is taken at the Holland Landing, and you can see they actually list who's coming for the presents by the sort of the dotem of the headmen for that particular group. And of course the women would all have had the wives of the men would have had a different dotem. But if you can see on the right hand side, the Mississauga Indians taken at the Humber River, you see the Bark tribe there, and that actually could also be birch tree because of the animate or inanimate distinction on birch. So definitely there, definitely in Eastern Ontario. Alan, did you want to? A couple of the other questions were about well, the canoe race that I saw, that I showed, sorry, was definitely it definitely was a canoe race, and it was typical of the kinds of games that people were playing at the time, like the sort of the typical kinds of large games that you would have at a gathering. And I think some of the other questions, I'm trying to see if I can get them up in the chat.
Actually, if you look at, there's a fellow named Squire Martin who's around Rama, and if you look in some of the records, he'll actually signs the petitions with a tree.
Yeah.
And there's roots and there's branches, and then the other thing that I showed you on there, that Fork Stick clan, in the 1836 treaty, the fellow's name is Bemasage, and that means the sun goes along shining, which is a reference to the path of the sun. Anyway, Bemasage, it doesn't have anything to do with a forked stick. That's one of the things that we have to try and dispel. A lot of people look at how they hear how West Coast people have clans, and that specific names go with those clans. We don't have that as Anishinaabe people. And Heidi showed you a picture of Oga, and that means a pickerel. and his clan is the Caribou.
Yeah.
And a pickerel has nothing to do with a caribou. And the same thing, Nibalcom means the night thunderer, and his clan is the Caribou. Night thunder has nothing to do with the caribou. So there's this notion, and it's through, I think, looking at what other nations do, especially like out west, and Haudenosaunee people, they have a specific set of clans and names that go with those. Anyway, Anishinaabe aren't the same as Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe aren't the same as Haida or Tsimshian or whoever else. We're just not the same. And so they did sign with actual trees, and that's the Odawa clan. What they debate about that one is whether it's a fork in a river or a fork stick. But by the time 1862, they actually sign, and they write in Ojibwe Mitik. So they say it's a stick by then, for sure.
Yeah, I would say too that, you know, in all the I have like a giant spreadsheet, I guess, of all the different Doodemic I've encountered, and I think it's over 100 now. So there's tremendous variation, and some of them, and I discuss it in the book, some of them come in through adoption from other people. Like William Warren talks about the wolf coming in through adoption with the Dakota, and there's other kinds of ways. I think one of the things that's so amazing about the system is that it was really flexible and it was really local. So people people weren't dogmatic about it. It wasn't rigid, and I think that's where you see the creativity too around using the lion as the totem for people who had the English father, or the rooster for those who had the French father. You also see in the Western Great Lakes, you'll see people talk about being adopted into the Eagle clan if they have an American father. So there's
Right.
you know, there are these local variations on this sort of broader, deep structure that's distinctly Anishinaabe. And it's, yes, so that's good. And I also think somebody asked a great question about items in museums, will they ever come home? That's a really good one as well. There's a lot of work on repatriation. If anyone's interested in seeing some of the work that Alan and I and others have been doing through the Great Lakes Research Alliance, you can go to www.grassac.org, and there's a there's a website, and we also have a database of a lot of those items, and it's any community member who would like access to that, we have that research database. So you can always reach out to me. Any other questions? Or everyone's like, it's 9:45, maybe. So
yeah,
I don't like go all night, but
yesterday, well, I'm on my wife's computer now. This Teams wouldn't work on my Apple laptop, and we tried again today. So actually, I was like, oh, I'll show you a stick clan, because I have that. I was looking at some petitions written around Coldwater.
Yeah.
But I'm on a different laptop, and so I can't call that up.
But you can take his word for it. They're definitely there. And I think it was also a great question somebody asked about why are there so few Doodemic today, that everyone seems to like their bear and eagle and crane. And I think this is, you know, where more research will be as we work through these documents and these archival documents that, you know, connect people's names to those families that are listed at least on those treaty documents, and more genealogical work, like the work Alan's done at the OCF with connecting the North Shore communities to their totem. More of those ones will be recovered, and we'll learn more about, you know, fierce predator Doodemic, like the
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big one, but it's really amazing, the diversity of them. The crayfish, there's a crayfish totem on some of the treaties. So.
And then some of these questions are really big, like that. Like she said, it's 9:45, and.
But we're happy to well, Alan and I, as I said, can talk all night, but we probably will want to get some sleep too. But you can always feel free to reach out. Somebody asked about when the book's available. Oh, I wanted to say a couple of quick things about that. One, Nikki Recollet, who's amazing cartographer, brilliant cartographer, did the map in the book, and a big miigwech to her because she got all the historic names and contemporary First Nations and tribal councils on that map. It is awesome and well done. And the book itself, I think they put it up at the beginning. It's going to be also, there's a link we put up to the Osgood Society for Legal History, because if you happen to be a student at any post-secondary institution, you can join the Osgood Legal Society for $25 and they send you the book. So it's like less than half price. Anyway, so always keen to save money. Okay, so yeah, she's putting it up there. So that's great. And actually, the University of Toronto Press, I think, is selling it for less too than the standard books store price. So that's great. Thanks everyone for your interest in that. And any author profits from that, I mean, after paying, the authors have to pay the image license fees, but after that, any profits I have was going to go to the OCF, the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation, to do more cultural work, because it's not something, yeah, it's to give back. So that's where that's going. So, and hopefully have more great exhibits there. They have some incredible exhibits.
Okay, awesome. Well, what a great evening. Nishin, miigwech, Heidi and Alan. And I gotta say miigwech to Alan's wife for helping us get us linked up on her PC. That was very helpful. And miigwech for Alan for sticking it out with us and trying to get connected with us for a few days. We did have some challenges. We are learning, but it's starting to work out quite well, so we're very happy. So I just wanted to let everybody know before we close off that Heidi and Alan's discussions tonight will be available on our website within the next day or so. Matt will be working away behind the scenes as he has been all week, so we very much appreciate that. And yeah, I just want to invite everybody to look out for our future treaty events. We have Josh Manchwabi tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for our final evening armchair session, and he's going to be talking about colonial mapping of Lake Huron. So we're very excited about that. Very excited to be going into the schools tomorrow to be talking to some of our youth and our kids about talking with our chiefs on some treaty talks, and very excited to launch our activity book. So please come back and join us. Feel free to email any questions, and we're very happy that you're here with us for Treaty Week, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Pamapi.